Tonight, well, this is awful. There is disturbing news about ISIS. You might want to brace yourself for this one. Yep, he's from Boston. Another one, a tech-savvy terrorist running the social media arm of ISIS. He's most likely a Boston man who graduated from Northeastern University. And for the very latest, Fox News Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge joins us. Catherine, this is terrible.
It is terrible, Greta. This guy's name is Ahmed Abu Samra, a Boston native with Syrian and American citizenship. He's believed to be a driving force behind the ISIS social media presence. Federal investigators believe Abu Samra may be living in Aleppo, Syria right now, and based on new intelligence, he was added to the FBI's most wanted list. He's fluent in English and Arabic and has a college degree with computer studies, and he once worked for a telecommunications firm. And while we don't know if he played a role in the posting of these execution videos of the two American journalists, a review of these federal court documents shows that he is part of a close-knit circle of U.S. citizens who are among the first to join al-Qaeda's digital jihad. They include Alabama native Omar Hamami, who was killed in Somalia, Daniel Maldonado, who pled guilty to federal terrorism charges in 2007. And Abu Samra's close friend, Tariq Mahana, also joined al-Qaeda in Iraq, and that's the forerunner of ISIS. And you know, the traditional view is that these terrorist groups go when the opportunity presents itself. But I've seen sort of a subtle shift in the thinking among some analysts in the intelligence community, and they're placing more of a premium on those bin Laden documents. We haven't seen many of them, but in the documents, he said it was important for operatives to pay attention to significant anniversaries, such as 9/11, and then also important holidays.
As for Abu Samra, I would assume that he's on every watch list known to mankind. He's got an American passport.
Correct.
But he must be on every watch list. Of course, it doesn't stop him from walking across the border in North Dakota or something.
It doesn't, but he's in Syria, and we technically would have to rely on help from the Syrian government to track him down. He's been there probably for over 4 years. And
but if he leaves Syria to come to the United States, he's well,
it'd be very difficult for him to get into this country for sure. But he raises the issue of whether at a certain point these Americans who have gone to Syria are really forfeiting their right to be U.S. passport holders. We saw this in the targeted drone campaigns with the American cleric in Yemen. We seem to be heading down the same road with ISIS in Iraq and potentially Syria. And if that happens with American citizens, you can look to see their passports revoked as well.
Imagine how potent he is for recruiting. I mean, it's one thing to have someone who we're unfamiliar with, who's maybe a Syrian native or from some other country, but he's a potent recruiter.
Well, these guys are very fluent in the language of social media. They grew up with it, and I've often called it the digital jihad because it has no boundaries. And when we look at the production values in those execution videos, no matter how graphic they are, they're able to get that stuff up on the web with lightning speed. And significantly, after it went up, they understand that federal investigators are looking at them, and they posted instructions to sort of senior members on Twitter about how to post video and then try and hide your trail so you can't be found. So they're pretty smart people, and their message resonates with that group under 30 that seems to be making this trip.
Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
And did President Obama's advisors just get to him? He sure has stepped up the language. 2 days ago, he called ISIS a manageable problem. And today, he said he wants to defeat, dismantle, and destroy the group. Just words, or is President Obama ready to ask? Former Congressman Alan West joins us. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Greta. How are you?
I'm very well. So the words have changed. I suppose that's a positive sign, but what should he be doing?
Well, what we have to come to understand is the president needs to settle upon what in-state desired effects he wants to have. Because as a military planner, if you tell me you want to destroy, then you say you want to disrupt, then you tell me you want to dismantle, you want to defeat, you want to degrade, then you want to manage the problem. You know, you're all over the place and you're creating such confusion. I don't know exactly how to plan and how to prepare some type of operational plan for you to approve. So the president needs to, sit down with his advisors, and I would say not with Valerie Jarrett, but with the military advisors, and come up with the contingency plan that is necessary to truly destroy ISIS, because that's the only course of action that is viable for the United States of America, that region, and to include the entire world.
All right, in addition to your military background, you actually were in Iraq. So, I mean, the big question is how to defeat ISIS. I know the president said no boots on the ground. So if we armed, if we gave the money and supplies they need, can the Iraqi military and the Kurdish military now, if they have the weapons, would they be able to defeat ISIS in Iraq and maybe into Syria?
Well, that, I would not go toward the Iraqi military because I don't want to get into supporting potentially any type of Iranian-backed event. But I would definitely look to support the Kurdish military, the Peshmerga.
Then could they?
And in
could
conjunction.
They alone?
Say again?
Could they alone? Because
well,
President
no, they
Obama
can't.
says no
They can't
boots
do
on
it
the
alone.
ground.
Well, see, that's the problem, Greta, in that you cannot be such an ideological intransigent that you don't want to, fully do and commit what needs to be done. You can't say what you're not willing to do. The events are dictating that. So you need to have a full-out air campaign, not just airstrikes that amount to about 5 or 6 a day. That's what we're doing. And you need to have a coordinated, joint and combined ground operation that ensures you have destroyed ISIS. The Kurdish Peshmerga can do that to an extent, but you're going to have to put your own military forces on the ground. People are going to have to direct airstrikes in. You're going to have special operations forces that are working in conjunction with the Kurdish Peshmerga because they don't have the same radio equipment that we have to be able to communicate with our aircraft that are going in and doing strike operations or doing close air support operations. So again, the president is saying what he's not willing to do, but all he is doing is creating the gap by which the enemy can exploit him.
Congressman, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Greta.
And there's another American citizen in the United States under investigation by the FBI for ties to terrorism. He is terror cab trained and was kicked out of the Twin Cities' largest mosque. KMSP investigative reporter Tom Lydon broke this story. Again, he's breaking the story. He joins us with the very latest. Tom, what is this story?
Well, Greta, this may be the guy who can connect the dots for us, and he has a really fascinating backstory. 31-year-old Amir Mashal began hanging out at the Al Farouk Youth and Family Center earlier this year, one of the largest mosques here in the Twin Cities. But in June, the mosque kicked him out, called police, and got a no trespass order. Police report says the mosque was concerned about Mashal interacting with their youth. The director of Al Farouk tells me a volunteer heard Mashal proselytizing a radical Islamist ideology, very jihadist in nature. Now, some of the 15 people who have traveled from Minnesota to Syria to fight for ISIS had attended Al Farouk, including a 15-year-old girl who left 2 weeks ago. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, Greta. Back in 2007, Amir Mashal was arrested in Kenya after leaving a Somalia training camp. The FBI suspected him of being part of al-Qaeda. It was al-Qaeda at the time, not al-Shabaab. And they interrogated him for 3 months. He was shuffled between jails in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia. But eventually, he was released back into the U.S. without any criminal charges. The ACLU filed a lawsuit on his behalf, which was dismissed a couple of months ago. And as part of that lawsuit, the ACLU claims the FBI even tried to turn Mashal into a government informant by promising to take him off a no-fly list. His family lives in Egypt. Now, people have heard about that here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and I'll tell you, there are lots of rumors, especially in the Somali community, that he may be some kind of double agent. So was he working for the FBI? Was he working for ISIS? None of the above? We don't know, and the FBI had no comment on our story tonight.
All right, where is he?
That's a darn good question. We don't know. I asked the FBI. I don't know if they even know at this point. They wouldn't tell me, at least.
And at least tip our hat to that mosque for throwing him out, I guess, because they didn't like him.
I got to say, and I don't know if too much should be made of the fact that the kids have gone, some of the people have gone through this mosque, because hundreds go through this mosque, and it's not like there's a membership or anything like that. So I'm not sure if we should make too much of the fact that some of the travelers went there. But here's the important part. I think you hit on it, Greta. This mosque did everything they were supposed to do. They had some guy espousing a radical jihadist philosophy. What did they do? They picked up the phone. They called the police, and we know that local police department forwarded that information onto the Joint Terrorism Task Force. What happened from there, we don't know.
Tom, another great story you broke. Thank you.
Thank you.
Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel warned the threat posed by ISIS is beyond anything we've seen. Now, that warning is terrifying. Former Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff joins us. Nice to see you, sir.
Good to be on, Greta.
That was absolutely chilling when the Secretary of Defense said that.
Well, I think it's certainly true that since September 11th, we now face the most threatening environment that we've had over the last 11, 12 years. Now, exactly how it's going to play out is not going to be the same as what we saw in 2001, but I think what we're facing is a very hardened enemy, a ruthless enemy, a cruel enemy, and most disturbingly, an enemy that has been very successful in recruiting Americans and Westerners to go fight over in Syria and in Iraq.
Plus, they have so much money and access, because it isn't hard to get in the United States if you have a Western passport. You get a Western European passport, and then you just come here. You don't need a visa.
Right. And that's, the terrorists understood that right after 9/11, we put up some very tough measures to keep foreigners out of the country if we were uncertain about whether they were risky or not. So they started to recruit Americans and Westerners who don't go to through that same kind of vetting process. And that's really the holy grail for the terrorists, is how do you get an American who has the right to come back to the U.S., trained, hardened, radicalized, and then send that person back to carry out a terror mission.
And it's so easy to do the soft targets. Even to get the power grid, I imagine, it's pretty easy. I mean, like, you've got big sporting events. I mean, there's so many soft targets.
Well, and part of the change I think we're going to see in tactics from what we saw back in 2001 is the terrorists are going to be less focused on the one big cataclysmic event and more willing to carry out multiple attacks against smaller targets. We saw that in Mumbai in India in 2008. We've seen it in, for example, the Boston Marathon, which was, I think, intended to be followed with other attacks elsewhere. And so now their tactics have changed, and that in some ways makes it more difficult, because the more widespread and the smaller scale the plots, the less of a signature there is and the harder to detect.
And of course, you don't need much money. When you talk about the Boston Marathon, I mean, they got a pressure cooker and I don't know what off the internet. It isn't difficult to do this. You just have to basically find someone who is so evil.
That's right. But the thing that's really changed is when you have people like the Boston Marathon folks or some of the other people who've tried to carry out attacks here, they've not been very competent in terms of bomb making or in terms of their operational activity. When you bring people over to Syria and Iraq, you train them into how to make bombs, you train them in combat, you get them even more radicalized by exposing them to violence. If they come back, now they are not only evil, but they're capable. And that's, I think, why everybody is pressing the alarm button in terms of the developments over the last several months.
I suspect that as I listen to you, I think, what's the best way to protect ourselves? I suppose sort of citizens is the safest thing. If you've got some weird neighbor who's got C4 plastique or something like that, I mean, it really is, because the FBI can't be watching everybody.
Well, a couple of things. It's always been the case that when the regular average citizen sees something strange and reports it, that's been the best way we've had for finding people in the U.S. plotting things. And that was true even back in the period right after 9/11. So the ordinary citizen engaged and willing, as they say, to say something when they see something is our best line of defense. But candidly, the other line of defense is our intelligence community. And, there's been a lot of controversy now about NSA and the fact that in focusing on foreign interception, sometimes we get Americans picked up. Well, there's a reason for that. If Americans are talking to a number that's associated with a foreign terrorist group, you bet we want to know that. Those are the people we ought to be looking at. And now more than ever, we're going to need to make sure that our capabilities in collecting intelligence and signals overseas are not compromised.
What do you do about the situation? Look, it's more likely if someone comes from Yemen that the person's been in a training camp, or Syria or something, than if the person comes from, I don't know, Bermuda. What about that profiling? I mean, it's such a sensitive issue.
Well, a lot of it is where people have traveled, where their communication and their money has come from. For years, we've collected what they call passenger name record data, which is forwarded by airlines to us for all incoming flights. And we're able to look and see, is there somebody on the flight who maybe got their ticket paid for by a bank account that's associated with terrorists, or has come in a roundabout way from Pakistan or Afghanistan, where there are training camps. And, we ran that program retroactively against the 9/11 hijackers, and we discovered if we'd had that program in 2001, we would have picked up a majority of the hijackers as being connected with terrorists.
Mr. Secretary, nice to see you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be on, Greta.
And today, Secretary of State John Kerry telling 10 nations at the NATO conference to come up with a comprehensive plan to combat ISIS. And he said do it before the UN General Assembly convenes on September 22nd. And former UN Ambassador John Bolton joins us. I guess that means, sir, if he's told them to come up with a plan, it means that right now, as we sit here, there is no plan.
Well, that's exactly right. And these nations are not going to come up with a plan. We're going to come up with the plan. And it's a rump group of NATO. It's not even the entire NATO alliance.
Wait a second, a rump group?
It's a smaller group of the alliance, plus Australia. And I'm glad the Australians are in. But the way NATO works is we do the plan. We give it to NATO, NATO agrees to it. That's how it works. So to tell the other countries to help come up with a plan means, A, we don't have one, and B, if we have something when the General Assembly opens which is utterly irrelevant to this issue, it's going to be a political plan and not a military plan.
Why do you think he said that? Because, I mean, none of the 10 countries, the U.S., U.K., France, Australia, Canada, Germany, Turkey, Italy, Poland, and Denmark. Now, one of them is going to send a ground troop there. It's really going to be left to the Kurds, the Kurdish army, and the Iraqi army.
And it's going to require us to provide the intelligence and air support to help them out. The other countries will supply advisors. I think they'll supply arms and other supplies. But basically, it's going to be our project, as it typically is.
I suppose, though, on the good side, though, so we don't want everyone, you know, it does look like having a coalition, even if it's just in name and appearance, is better than not having one.
Well, that depends. I mean, this is a coalition that's smaller to NATO. That's smaller than NATO. So when you have the NATO alliance, and Turkey being right there is a NATO ally directly affected, why isn't the entire alliance with us?
Why isn't it? Because NATO says ISIS is a problem for everybody. Why isn't all of NATO?
Because I think many of the Eastern European countries, I'm glad Poland's in there, but they're worried about what's happening in Ukraine, where NATO is also failing. I mean, there is a lot of rhetoric at this NATO summit. I think the president finally got his lines right about degrading and destroying the Islamic State. But it's a summit that I fear we will look back on in 30 days and say, a lot of rhetoric, no performance.
I guess it doesn't make any sense just to have 10. They should all be doing it.
Yeah, why couldn't they all get together?
I mean, because if they all have if NATO itself has said that ISIS is a problem for NATO, why are we carving out 10 countries to do this planning business?
There's no logic to it at all, except that the others simply wouldn't have agreed to anything of any substance, and so this was more a coalition of the willing. But didn't we learn anything on 9/11 when NATO invoked Article 5 of the treaty to come to America's defense? When the terrorists attack, it is an attack on one that's an attack on all. It should be the whole alliance.
Ambassador, thank you, sir.
Thank you.